Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to present to you Mr. Geoff Stirling, the greatest businessman of the century. Please stand from Mr. Welcoming Mr. Stirling.
When we come together with an organization that is called God Almighty Hospitality Inn, and we realize the Christian element that motivates all of us, it's interesting when you realize that all the missing years of Christ is available, and yet it doesn't contradict any of our belief systems with the St. James Version or any of the other Bibles, whether it's Episcopal, Church of England, Anglican, Roman Catholic, Pentecostal, Salvation Army. There's no contradictions. In fact, it's interesting when you are in India and you find books that haven't been translated into English going back 12 to 15,000 years. I've always been interested in the fact that when Moses left Egypt, he didn't notice there was a pyramid behind him that had been built 70,000 years ago. I know that those of us who have studied some of the realities in Egypt are told that the Great Pyramid is 5,000 years old. But Manly P. Hall, who when he died, his mine was called a national treasure. I spent quite a long time with him in many places. And he said to me, Geoff, the Great Pyramid is between 68,000 and 70,000 years old. Just as if we accept the basic thing with Adam and Eve, it means their children married each other, which is not which is not thought about. There's so many things you discover as you go around the world and you follow the trail of knowledge, the fall of consciousness that we're conscious of, when you think that only 10% of our brain is operative. A 58-ounce organism, 95.3% hydrogen and oxygen, and we're only operating with 10%. Because the fun of life, it seems to me, is the realization that we are indeed the living spirit. That when Christ talked of the Father and I are one, we all have that small voice inside us called our conscience. And there's no question that when you kill your conscience, you kill your consciousness. You no longer feel responsible at any level. My mother was born in Finhorn, in the south of England, and she came to Newfoundland to visit her twin brother, who was a minister at St. Mary's Rectory. And there she met my father, whose family had come out from Stirling in Scotland, and also were ministers. So I grew up with not the slightest question that we were here as his children, and we were here like a kindergarten, slowly evolving. Newfoundland is such a unique place, and all of us who are Newfoundlanders are so proud to be Newfoundlanders, because we are a distinct society. We go back 500 years, where Columbus only arrived, and he was met, it's interesting, when Columbus arrived he was met on the shore by an English-speaking Beothuk Indian. Just as when Cabot came here, he had his son Sebastian with him. And once he knew the trade route, Sebastian came back 24 months later and started to take slaves, Beothuk slaves, back to Portugal. As we follow the trail of knowledge, and knowledge is power, the reason students go to this university is to gain the knowledge that will give them the power to increase their living and livelihood in whatever career they take. And that's why I felt that the religious background that all of us have, I mean, there's no village in Newfoundland or Labrador that doesn't have a cathedral, a temple, a church, or a synagogue. Because the fundamentals that have made us the way we are is the fundamentals that we believe in the Holy Roman Catholic's attitude, which is the renewal of the body and life ever after. In India, they say it's 2/3 of the world believe in reincarnation, but that's simply everlasting life. We're here in an eternity, and our belief systems, depending on our programming, really, are an interesting thing. I found that wherever I've gone in the world, if you see everybody as brothers and sisters, grandmothers and grandfathers, and you have that Christian consciousness to love one another and love yourself, which means the full development of yourself. To thine own self be true, this above all. Well, as we develop ourselves and have a Christian consciousness, the Christ consciousness is the realization that love is a vibration. Love is an actual vibration. We know that when we're in a loving mood. There's 12 universal laws that I believe in, and I've used on television late at night quite a bit. And the first law, the universal law, is everything is energy. Money is green energy. It can get activated by its utilization. So it's energy. And energy is something you refine in the body and use it, hopefully, on a positive note. But all the times that I've studied energy, it really comes down to the utilization of the realization that the body is such a unique tool. It can be generated and excavated with a lot more depth than we can see. When you see in India some of the things that they have done through discipline, and discipline and discipleship is very close together. They see the discipline is your own disciple, and it's up to you to refine yourself and take full responsibility for yourself so you can be a more useful servant as we spend our time in this reincarnation, because 2/3 of the world accept that as a given. It's only in 1/3 of the world where it's still questionable. But I don't see any contradictions. If you believe in everlasting life, then you obviously believe in a renewal after this lifetime. And in the experimentation I've seen in India, and some of the things I've seen which are beyond our acceptance, conceiving the inconceivable is a very difficult thing when you think about it. How do you conceive the inconceivable? For example, as I said, all of the missing years of Christ's life is available. In the Vatican Library, there's thousands and thousands of books that have never been translated into English. Fontanjali, who was the founder of Yogi, his books, written 12,000 years ago, only one of them has been translated into English. And I always thought at college and university that I had gotten all the information or all the knowledge that was available. And then you find as you travel that thousands of books with incredible information about the body and the mind haven't been translated. The knowledge, for example, that yogi, I have seen them buried for 3 months and then be shoveled out of an area and come back in full health, which is inconceivable to us, that somebody could be in the ground for 2 or 3 months and then revived in full health. In fact, there's so many things that I've seen that staggered my imagination. There's a man called Sai Baba in Bangalore in southern India who, since he was 12, has been doing the kind of miracles that we relate to with Jesus Christ. And I had a camera crew and stayed in his company for 5 or 6 days. And every morning, 200 or 300 women line up outside his huge estate on one side and 200 or 300 men on the other. And Sai Baba, who's now in his late 50s, goes down with a handful of holy dust. And they're like, if you're in Holy Communion, he fills your hand with it. And he'll do 200 or 300 people, and then he'll put his hand back, and they'll clean his hand with a silk handkerchief, and then he'll go down on the men's side and fill everybody's hand with holy dust. And he has a very form-fitting orange gown. And I watched him do this, and I thought, there's no way in the world he could have a sack on his back and a tube under his arm and dust coming out. And yet, the amount he puts in everybody's hand is a handful. My cameraman spent quite a bit of time, and he kept doing these things of manifesting out of nowhere material. And it staggers the imagination because he's actually able to do it, manifesting. And these are just part of the sort of demonstration that we are only touching the surface. I watched the other day in Vancouver a new invention that goes on your hand, and you can do this on a clear channel, and in front of you your thoughts are projected, actually forming. The actual thoughts are, it's like your voice-activated now secretarial packages you can buy, where I can dictate on the phone, and then it can be translated to a fax and mail and sent out, and there's nobody necessarily in between. It even corrects the spelling. These are the kind of things that I find fascinating, because I find that when Christ said, "Things I do, you can do greater," it was literally meant. It's not abstract. When you consider that here we are operating with 10% of our potential, like having a car that can go 100 miles an hour and we're driving it at 10 miles an hour and we're not aware of the fact. Or Gurdjieff, the great Russian philosopher, who said we live in a 9-story building and we're all in the basement. And we don't know the other 8 stories are up there. And Plato, the same way, with the shadows in the cave. That we are content at that level of consciousness, and we don't search for a higher level. In Egypt, I found when we went and meditated in the King's Chamber for a solid week, the vibrations in the King's Chamber are so different that when we went into the history of the King's Chamber, we found that the priests would fast for a number of days and then would lay in a sarcophagus and have a completely out-of-body experience. And after 3 days laying there, and the out-of-body experience, once you've had an out-of-body experience, you never have any question anymore that you're not the body. The body is a living temple, but once you've had an out-of-body, as they have, and anybody who's gone down to the Baltimore Institute, where they're experimenting with LSD, with terminally ill people, and filming it all, none of them, after the experience, have the slightest fear of dying, of leaving the body. It's really an unbelievable experiment to watch the films of these terminally ill people having an out-of-body experience that's so strong in them that they never again fear death. And this has been going on now for about 25 years, research. It's been going on in Russia, where they're proving that they can change the consciousness of our belief systems, because most of us are not aware of how strong our belief systems is. The programming you do to a child up to the age of 3 is 30,000 times more powerful than the programming we get at 21. It's a thrilling time. It's an incredible time. If someone said to me 10 years ago, Geoff, your Oz network will be right around the planet by the year 2000. Actually, it was right around by the year 1998, where there's nowhere in the planet, including the Philippines, where you can't pick up Oz, and now NTV, because we're up on 3 different satellites. It's interesting to realize that the 7,000-odd islands that the Philippines have, that there's in every island you can now get NTV. Because we're spreading. I mean, the whole concept of being in business is to expand the business, but to expand it, realizing the responsibility we have. We have turned down a tremendous amount of programming we could have had because we won't accept that level, which is exploiting, to a large extent, the viewer. Particularly the religious programs, where you're being told that if you don't send money in, God will take him home, whoever he happens to be, which is exploitation, in our opinion. And we won't accept that programming, because we feel that, powerful as it is, television cannot just be casually used to exploit. I know it will cause a lot of laughter if I was saying this in front of my colleagues on the board, which is now changing because the CTV network has been sold. And the only part of it not sold is the Newfoundland-Labrador part, which I happen to control. The rest of it's been sold. So you'll see, maybe, changes in the programming, but not with us, because the new corporation that's bought it for $2.4 billion may have a totally different philosophical approach than we've had, who started it. Because it had to have more reason for existence than just an advertising medium. And that's what we've tried to do with it. We've tried to, by reducing the commercial content and by taking only the best programming from all the networks, so that you're not troubled with having to switch from channel to channel to see Another World, or Days of Our Lives, or The Bold and the Beautiful, or any of the dramas in the daytime. And then the nighttime, you see the best shows from all the networks, which are, this is why it's called the 5-star network. It has the 5 different networks and the best shows from all those networks. I always feel that when you are asked to speak, you've got to say to yourself, what can I possibly say that anybody in the room might be interested in? What do I know or have learned or can express that's different, that really and truly is worthy of being able to come in front of a group of people and say something that they haven't heard? Well, I just found myself as a curious Newfoundlander, by the time I hit 40, of going around all over the planet to find the information and go to all the places, the King's Chamber, Himalayas. There's a place called Finhorn up in northern Scotland, where they're growing 40-pound tomatoes by surrounding the plants and focusing on the plants and meditating on the plants. And these unbelievable tomatoes and other vegetables, 5 and 10 times bigger than we've ever seen, are growing there. It's Finhorn. It's and his wife had a religious experience where they were told to go and start a community, which they've done. And by focusing on a spiritual community, and when I say that, I mean that the acceptance that there's a higher consciousness. That's the way I see this movie. That there's a benevolent, we can call it the Force, we can call it God, we can call it Krishna, we can call it anything we want, but it exists. And that's the fundamental faith, that it exists, and it's benevolent. And that's the way I lived. When I had a question, as Emerson said, if you have a question and you can formulate the question, in a day or so you'll get the answer. That's where he said the Father and I are one. Because we do have, our brain is a unique, unbelievable, self-generating, self-renewing, thousands, trillions of cells, and each cell is conscious. And the group consciousness is the refining of ourselves, so that you expand your comprehension at every level, your curiosity, your imagination. The Christ consciousness is the unlimited potential of ourselves. Whole, perfect, strong, powerful, loving, harmonious, happy, unlimited. That's the aphorism they give you in the Himalayas. I am whole, perfect, strong, powerful, loving, harmonious, happy, unlimited. Now as you say that to yourself, as you confirm the realities of life and the knowledge you have, it strengthens the individual's self-esteem, because it's part of loving yourself. You can't love yourself if you're not maximizing your potential. You can't really love yourself. So if you don't love yourself, you can't love your neighbor. You've got to start with that, fundamental, as he said. Christ's message was basically pretty simple. Love one another. Do unto others as you'd have others do unto you. But basically start with loving yourself. I talked to a surgeon the other day who happened to be at the table I was. He said, most of my patients are under 30. Have their faces changed, or their bodies changed. I mean, loving yourself is a vital thing. I know that we've always thought of love of oneself as a conceit in modest state of affairs. But that's not the level it's meant. It's meant at knowing yourself. Most people can tell me what the carburetor of their car does, but they can't tell me what their pancreas does or their spleen. When I was told that my son only had 9 months to live, and I had 3 surgeons, top men, all confirmed that there was no hope. And I simply said to them, look, we're in his image. We can self-correct, but you've got to have the discipline to reject the programming that accepts the premise that we can't self-correct. I don't believe there's any disease you can't correct. But you've got to be willing to understand why you've got the DIS, dis-ease, dash ease. It's lack of harmony in the body. So you have to say to yourself, what created the lack of harmony? What am I taking in to my 32-foot shoe, which we are? Your lower intestine, your colon, your ascending colon, and your upper intestine is 32 feet long. From here across the room, if you open me up, be stretched across. That's the way we are. That's the reality of this package we got. A 95.7 protoplasm, 95.3% hydrogen oxygen, protected in a helmet that comes together, the bones come together, our arms and legs are extensions. As we see ourselves that way, we see ourselves differently, because we're a simple organism. We're 7 basic organs, and all renewing themselves constantly. There's not a person in this room who has a cell in their body more than 7 years old. Not a cell. Your eyeball is 95% water, and it's replaced every 8 or 9 weeks. The whole concept of the human entity I'm always amazed that we weren't taught this when we were young children. In fact, the more I have traveled, the more I've been amazed how little knowledge we were given. Particularly in England, where I went to grammar school, where you're indoctrinated, where you're told that, you're not told that you're imperfect, you're told you're born in sin. You're unworthy. Well, that's heavy programming that you've got to overcome personally. Or you've got to go to an ashram or a monastery where you have a group who come together with one belief system. That's why it's so important to have a religious base. The Christ consciousness is a tremendously powerful and wonderful thing to have, because without it, you're inclined to rationalize anything you want to get away with. In the self-analytical aspect of our lives, where we spend time trying to, like in a monastery, where you can at least have the quiet and serenity and peacefulness of a few months, where you can sort of get to know yourself. We're so hypnotized by the activity of survival that we don't spend a lot of time getting to know ourselves and realizing how unique we are individually. I mean, when you consider that every snowflake is a unique design, and every one of us is a unique individual with a unique talent. There's none of us in this room that doesn't have a unique talent. Whether we want to find that talent, whether we want to spend the energy and effort discovering it, it's up to us. We have free will. This is a free will zone. And free will takes with it a great deal of responsibility. If you're going to have free will, then it means that you have the control of the situation. And that takes a lot of responsibility. People avoid responsibility by rationalizing. There's an old saying, when a man thinks he's thinking, most of them are rearranging their prejudice. They relate that to thinking. Because it's not politically correct to touch anything that's going to create a vibration or rock the boat. The result is that we go on and on, making the same mistakes, going around in circles politically, economically, because we're not willing to face some of the realities and some of the reforms that are necessary to come to grips with a complete change of our belief systems. I know it isn't a popular thing to question belief systems because we've been fragmented with different groups who have different belief systems. So they're on one side of the room and you're on the other because you don't agree in the belief system. I mean, in a little town in Arizona where some of my grandchildren were born, it's a town of 5,000. It's got 27 different churches. But they all believe in Christ. But they believe in different ways of expressing that. And I've found it interesting as I go, because I've gone to, when I travel around Newfoundland and go down every road, which I do, I go to any church that's open. And find it's interesting and fascinating, but it gives diversity to our personalities, because the churches are so different. The Anglican Church, the Church of England, which I was baptized in, is a very conservative, to put it mildly, church compared to the Pentecostal or compared to the Salvation Army or even compared to the Roman Catholic. It's very conservative. And when you go to a church that's more open in the sense of drums and guitars, which is now happening in our church finally, but it's a different belief system, because I feel you should be happy in church as you share the vibrations with other souls, because that's what we are. This is a room full of souls, a room full of spirits, a room full of individual angels. It's hard to see ourselves as we really are at times. We're inclined to see ourselves by a name. We're inclined to see ourselves by an occupation. We're inclined to see ourselves by our personality we develop to survive in the movie. And life is a movie. You're the producer, the director, the scriptwriter, and the heroine of your movie. And that's life. And you have that ability and that opportunity if you want to take it. But it's a responsibility you have to accept, that you are responsible for anything that happens in your life. There are no accidents, as they say in the Himalayas. There's no accidents. Even the Quran, as it talks to Muhammad as the messenger, it accepts the fact that Christ was also the messenger. But it also confirms that there's no accidents. Everything that happens to us is an experience. That's hard to rationalize at times when the negative energies seem to perform an unfair advantage, and we feel that we're in a valley of depression. But the fact is that there's no accidents, and therefore we have the ability to change anything by being positive by our attitude. They say in the morning, if you laugh in front of the mirror and look in the mirror and laugh heartily, you'll change the whole feeling and the vibes in the body. So the body takes on a much more different attitude for the day. It's better even if you see the day as the first day and the last day of your life. If you see every morning when you wake up as the last day of your life, you'll live it totally differently. You'll be much friendlier, happier, if you see it as your last day. That everything's happening to you that last day is just happening. There's no accidents. And you get through it that way. In this institute where I went down to watch them in their studies, because the Essenes take 7 years of training before they take the last 3 years to graduate. And the Essene group, and Christ was a member of the Essene group. If you read the missing years in the Urantia book, which was published in 1955, 2,100 pages of all the missing years, all of the explanations of the parables he spoke of, all broken down into an understanding that we can comprehend, and which is available in the library. It's never been, the Vatican Library has never, in fact, I was amazed that the first thing I think you see in the Vatican Library was hundreds of scholars translating the books that have been there for thousands of years. This is the 102nd anniversary of independence for Philippines. Well, there's 2,033 years ago that Christ, if you accept the historical dates, ascended, left the physical body and came back. We sort of celebrate the crucifixion rather than the resurrection. But it was 2,033 years ago. And in relationship to time, as I said, like 102 years seems like a long time for independence, but going back 2,033 years ago to realize that was when he proved we're not the body. The whole point of the ascension was to prove that we're not the body. And these experiments are doing in the foundation that I visited in Baltimore, are doing it through using chemicals and proving that they can have the same effect. You have to see the films to believe it fully, what's happening here. I'm delighted to be here. I am very impressed with the efforts the Philippine group are doing. When you think there's only 150 families, and of those there's only about 70 families here in St. John's, and to have a halfway house and all of the other positive things that are going on that this celebration celebrates is very impressive. We're certainly glad to have them in Newfoundland. We can use a lot more energy here, a lot more initiative. Joe Smallwood said to me one day when we were coming back from Korea, he said, if we could get 1,000 families from Hong Kong and 1,000 families from South Africa and 1,000 families from 2 or 3 other countries and have these cores of minorities adding energy and creativity and imagination to our society, we could make a quantum leap forward. And I agree. When I see down in Trapassi 45 empty houses on the waterfront because the fishermen can't make a living in that isolated part, and it's true all around the island, which we call an island, because Newfoundland and Labrador is as big as Japan, and Japan's 138 million people. It's bigger, Newfoundland is bigger than 12 American states combined. It's bigger than every state except Alaska and Texas, and it's about the same size as California. But we have beaten down, to a large extent, our initiative. We're so isolated. Therefore, to have more people, like you great people from the Philippines, who have made a decision to move to Newfoundland, is certainly a great thing for Newfoundland. And I welcome you, and I'm sure that every Newfoundlander does. I really have nothing else to say. I mean, I can talk in general terms, but I don't want to hold up the party and the dance. And if there's any questions, I'll be glad to answer of any kind. If there is no questions, I thank you for inviting me. It's not often I get an opportunity to talk to this number of people from various countries, but I appreciate the energy and the effort, and I thank you very much.